Hi everyone, my name is Krystal and I'm here with Olivia, Ami and Liam. Today our group will be investigating the Hunter Power project. This project is a 660 megawatt gas powered peaking station in Kurri managed by Snowy Hydro. It is designed to fill the gap left by closing the Liddell power station. The project was initially proposed in 2021 by Snowy Hydro as a $610 million investment with a functioning open cycle gas powered station, electrical switchyard and supporting infrastructure operating by the end of 2023. The project is designed to support electricity during peak load times to reduce strain on the existing national energy market. To further ensure the reliability of the project, a diesel-generated backup system was also integrated into the power station's design. As a team, we will analyse this project through 4 of the PMBOK lenses, including scope, cost, stakeholder and risk management.
Okay, so I'm Ami, and for scope management, I first looked at the approved baseline of the Hunter Power project. According to the consolidated approval by Snowy Hydro and the NSW Department of Planning and Environment, the project is approved as the Kurri gas-fired power station. Its main scope is a dual-fuel power station using natural gas and diesel with green hydrogen capacity, made up of 2 open-cycle gas turbine power plants with a total nominal output capacity of up to 750 megawatts. So the baseline scope is clearly focused on delivering a peaking power generation asset. The scope then changed through 2 formal modifications. According to modification 1, the project added precinct 3B as a temporary additional construction area to support laydown and construction traffic needs. This is important because it shows that construction logistics became part of the managed project scope. According to modification 2, a temporary workforce accommodation facility was also added for up to 200 personnel during construction only. So these changes didn't redefine the final power station, but they expanded the temporary construction support scope needed to be delivered. So finally, the project also had clear scope boundaries. According to the, again, consolidated approval, the project must be delivered in accordance with EIS Secretary directions and approval conditions. The approval also sets operational limits according to the maximum of 1,100 operating hours per year and 175 diesel generation hours per year. So my own key insight is that the scope management here was not just about define and just having a build. It was also a control mechanism, and the mechanism for temporary workers, traffic, workforce needs, environmental conditions, and also operational limits. So this helped separate the permanent project, the deliverable, from temporary support works. There you go.
My analysis on this project will be focused on the cost management PMBOK knowledge areas, using the 2021 final investment decision as a baseline. Outlined in that decision was this table summary of their financial prediction. They note that the power station had a lifespan of approximately 25 years based on the proposed minor maintenance schedules for 2027, 2035 and a major overhaul in 2038. For this reason, the goals are assumed to consider the power plant is functioning for 25 years post the proposed completion date. If we consider a couple of scenarios listed in this table, Snowy Hydro initially predicted a 12.3 return based on their $610 million capex. Even their composite down only factored in a return drop to 8.4%, considering the risks centred around permit delays, grid connection complications, and many more. Each of these listed risks had corresponding proposed risk control in place to minimise disruptions and remain on the predicted path. However, by the end of the 2023 financial year, Snowy Hydro annual report states that the Hunter Power project had been refinanced and predicted to cost $930 million, up from the originally proposed $610 million. And monthly payment claims officially classified the project as a primary source of liquidity risk. To quantify this shift using earned value analysis, we see a cost performance index that cashed well below 1. This is not representative of a standard S-curve of a cumulative cost. Instead, we see a hockey stick shaped curve. This led to a massive internal change within the company. Under the variable remuneration program, which typically offers incentive-based salary increases of up to 40% of an executive's fixed salary for senior management, the board implemented malus provisions due to the project's failures to meet its initial performance budget baseline, which resulted in no payment incentives for senior management. Such drastic changes internally highlight the severity of the cost blowout during this project. Transitioning into the 23-24 Snowy Hydro annual report, the project had spent $499 million locally by the end of the financial year, and they expected the power plant to begin its testing and commissioning phase in December 2024. They noted that bad weather had been the primary culprit, among other reasons, for delaying the project, which is interesting because weather was not explicitly listed and considered in their initial risk assessment when calculating the expected cost. The report then highlights a shift in strategy that declares the project timeframe is a high priority due to increasing demands for peak time energy usage. This increase suggests higher returns on investment, justifying the priority shift to scheduling, ultimately banding the short-term cost conservation. This scenario highlights classic PM-BOK trade-off, sacrificing budget to recover a failed schedule. This is why we get this hockey stick graph increase so severely as the project goes on. Finally, energy was first generated and transported to the main grid in July 2025. It was expected to be fully operational by the end of 2025 and was on track for the revised cost budget of $930 million. However, today, this project is still not commercially operational. On Snowy Hydro's website, early July 2025, they say the project had experienced 69 days of delay from weather in that year alone. And the target cost had then been further revised to reflect $1.3 billion. This clearly highlights that they had not sufficiently planned for weather delays, as the project was twice refinanced due to delays surrounding weather. Personally, I think that the initial cost analysis lacked the necessary detail regarding contingency reserves for weather and other unforeseen delays. Given that the 2021 business case already predicted a high yield and run by government organisations running off taxpayers' money, it was always going to be a priority to finish as soon as possible to begin realising those returns. Instead, I would have allocated more money initially to fast-track anything that could be impacted from weather, creating some buffer time that delays could bleed into. In doing so, I believe if this was like a private company running off their own profits, then costs would have been managed a bit more diligently to avoid running them.
Regarding stakeholder management, I performed this analysis considering the PM-BOK framework. The first process group is identifying the stakeholders. So although there wasn't a stakeholder registry available, I identified 3 key stakeholder groups, those being Snowy Hydro, governmental organizations and residents of Australia, and then more specifically, the Kurri region. This slide here details the key relationships between the groups. As Snowy Hydro is government owned, they are accountable to the government in terms of regulatory and funding. And then obviously the residents of Australia and the Kurri region are paying tax dollars to that government to fund the project. I considered legitimacy and urgency and power of each of these groups. It's obvious that the government has high power and legitimacy over the project because they are providing the regulatory go-ahead for things as well as the funding. Although it's still important to consider that the residents of the region have high urgency and legitimacy as the impacts from this project are impacting their daily lives, and so their concerns must be considered. Following the second process group in the PMBOK framework, planning stakeholder engagement, I chose to build a power interest grid based on my interpretation of the available documentation. As you can see, I've placed the Australian Commonwealth Government in the Manage Closely area. This is because they have the power to basically change the entire project if they choose to do so. They can change funding, they can change the go-ahead in terms of regulatory issues. And the Snowy Hydro executives I place in the high power area but low interest area. This is because Snowy 2.0 is probably taking over a majority of their concerns, but they still have power to change the project quite significantly. Both parts of the residents group have been put in the low power, but they're still relevant in terms of interest, as the Kurri region residents have to be kept informed because they have the potential to impact the project if their concerns are not heard, and same with the Australian public, as they have low formal power, but they are taxpayers and can impact the project. In terms of the third and fourth process groups in the PMBOK framework, the Manage and Monitor Stakeholder Engagement process groups, I have compiled a list of documentation that Snowy Hydro used to communicate with and manage their stakeholders throughout this project. First of all, they released their independent environmental audits as well as their responses to those audits. They also released numerous management plans, including wastewater, culture and heritage, noise, air quality, traffic, all sorts of things. Alongside these management plans and throughout the process, they also released monitoring data. This monitoring data was for groundwater and air quality. This would require a bit of technical expertise to kind of digest, but it's still useful to the right people. And then they've also released their compliance reports. Now, in terms of regular communication with the more lower power stakeholder groups, so the residents, they have a news page on their website, they have a complaints registry, and they have a community hotline, and they have social media. So on the news page, this is on their website, so you have to go into their website, you have to know what you're looking for to find it. The social media, they post a lot about Snowy 2.0 and not a lot about the 100 Power project, but you can still find information. And then they also have some site visits. So this image here is from a site visit where they had TAFE construction teachers come on a professional development day. In terms of their monitoring and controlling processes, what we can see from the documentation that they've made available is that their complaints registry basically details that once complaints are heard, they are responded to. And then their audit responses again, so anywhere in which the audit saw that they weren't meeting the requirements, they've responded to that audit and said, hey, no, we're going to do this on this date to make sure that we meet these standards that have been placed for us. So because they've released these documents, we can see what they've said. It's clear that they've made a structured attempt to manage the expectations and be transparent with their stakeholders. And although there's all this documentation available, it's fair to say that there's numerous confidential documents that haven't been released, considering the company is government owned. So we can see lots of information on their website, and this information is relevant to the community, but there would likely be communications that would not be shared. In terms of this key challenges that the Snowy Hydro project team saw in this project, there's two main things to be concerned about. The first was the government change to include green hydrogen in the plans. This happened relatively early on, so all the original proposal documents include this proposition, but because there was a government change, the way that the project team had to communicate with the government was likely to be impacted by this. So although the change was a change to scope, it would have probably greatly impacted the stakeholder management plans and the way that they needed to communicate, as it can be inferred that the introduction of the green hydrogen to the project meant the government that came in following the original proposition was a lot more environmentally conscious, and so the documentation that they might have required could potentially have been slightly different. We don't know this for sure, but it's fair to infer that. Another thing that they experienced were a lot of community complaints regarding noise and air pollution. In the complaints registry, they do respond to these, but I think that they definitely could have responded better, and they could have communicated better to avoid having these challenges occur. My key kind of takeaways, personally, my personal interpretation is that this project was greatly overshadowed by Snowy 2.0. Considering Snowy 2.0 has also gone greatly over budget and over schedule, there's a lot of scrutiny that Snowy Hydro as a whole is experiencing. So I think they're a bit closed off in terms of their communication, and they're quite vague in citing like what issues are occurring. Some of these quotes here show some examples of the news releases that they have on their website. And then again, the release of the technical reports is useful to the right audience, but they have complex language, so in terms of engagement with your everyday person, it's not very useful. And so I think as a whole, they didn't address the community concerns enough, and then they could have acknowledged these concerns and got ahead of them by promoting these changes to the project, or just the happenings of the project on social media and on their news site, and be more clear. And by being more clear, and they probably would have promoted a lot more trust from the community, and potentially this could have resulted in fewer complaints.
One of the most significant project management knowledge areas demonstrated throughout the Hunter Power project was risk management. Due to the scale, complexity, and public visibility of the project, risks existed across environmental, financial, operational, technical, and stakeholder-related areas. In project management, risk refers to an uncertain event or conditions that may affect the project objectives such as cost, schedule, scope, quality, and stakeholder confidence. Large infrastructure projects are particularly exposed to risks because they involve such long timelines, multiple stakeholders, complex logistics, environmental approvals, and significant financial investment. The Hunter Power project provides a strong example of how risks within a major engineering development can evolve over time and significantly influence project performance. One of the major risks affecting the Hunter Power project was schedule delay caused by extreme weather conditions. Weather-related disruptions created flow-on impacts across construction sequencing, labour utilisation, contractor coordination, and overall project delivery timelines. Another significant project risk involved financial performance. The scale of the project cost increase demonstrates how the schedule pressure, involving scope, and planning uncertainty can significantly affect budget outcomes within major infrastructure developments. Snowy Hydro also identified design immaturity at final investment decision as a key challenge affecting the project. From a project management perspective, this introduced planning and technical risk because incomplete planning and evolving design requirements can lead to rework, delays, and additional project expenditure during construction. This demonstrates how closely scope, schedule, and cost risks are interconnected through the project lifecycle. Stakeholder and environmental risks were also significant throughout the project lifecycle. Community concerns relating noise, traffic, air quality, and environmental impacts increased reputational and stakeholder management pressures throughout construction and commissioning. Because the project operated under substantial public and political scrutiny, accountability pressures on both Snowy Hydro and government stakeholders were significantly increased. This means that stakeholder perception and public communication became important risk management considerations alongside the technical delivery of the project itself. Environmental approval conditions also increased compliance and monitoring requirements throughout project delivery, demonstrating how environmental risks can continue to influence the project performance, long after initial approval. To manage these risks, Snowy Hydro implemented a structured monitoring and compliance framework supported by public reporting and stakeholder communication systems throughout the project's lifecycle. The project team relied heavily on stakeholder engagement strategies to maintain transparency and respond to community concerns. These measures included ongoing communication channels, monitoring programs, and structured compliance processes. From a project management perspective, these actions demonstrated attempts to proactively identify and respond to emerging project risks while maintaining stakeholder engagement and regulatory compliance. Despite these mitigation strategies, the Hunter Power project still experienced major schedule delays and significant cost escalations. This suggests that several project risks were either underestimated during planning or not fully mitigated during execution. In particular, weather conditions, evolving project requirements, and logistical complexity appeared to have a greater effect on the project performance than originally anticipated. The reference to design immaturity also highlights weaknesses in front-end planning and early risk assessment prior to project approval. Overall, the Hunter Power project demonstrates the importance of continuous risk assessment, realistic contingency planning, proactive stakeholder engagement, and strong front-end planning through large-scale engineering infrastructure developments.
The key findings from each project management knowledge area are as follows. Regarding scope management, Snowy Hydro only had slight temporary modifications that didn't impact the overall scope. This suggests that they managed their scope well. This key takeaway from this is that well-defined scope that is defined according to regulatory bodies reduces the chances of scope creep, and this is evident as the successes in this project have shown this. Regarding costs, failing to create sufficient contingency plans for weather and unforeseen circumstances can clearly lead to severe budget blowouts as demonstrated in this project. This forced the project team to take a classic PMBOK trade-off where budget is sacrificed to recover a failed schedule. Regarding stakeholder management, Snowy Hydro managed the project through a strong compliance-based approach, but the communication with the broader community could have been more regular, transparent, and accessible. Increasing this type of communication could have increased the support from the community and positively impacted the project by garnering more public support, although public support likely would not have impacted the budget or schedule blowouts. Key findings regarding risk management include the fact that risk mitigation strategies did improve communication and monitoring, but they did not fully prevent delays or cost overruns. And it is also clear that strong front-end planning and continuous risk assessment are critical in large infrastructure projects.